Oh, hi, good evening. Just getting a few more things set up for our Haggadah reading and our Seder meal tonight. I wanted to take this opportunity and give special thanks to so many who have enabled us to stream our Haggadah reading to you. Of course, I thank Phil Carey and his technical wizardry in enabling us to stream our Haggadah reading. We have some innovations over last year, and I'm hopeful that you will find it engaging and creative. In addition, I want to thank our Cantor, Ken Jaffe, for all of his hard work in preparing for our Seder this evening. We have a variety of music and languages tonight. It's going to be a multilingual Seder and Haggadah reading. We have English, Hebrew, Aramaic, Ladino, and Yiddish. This is going to be a real special treat. And of course, I must thank Harry Jacobs, Joe Tejas, the religious committee, and all the volunteers who've enabled us to have a meal. It's difficult enough having our Seder with our physical distancing during this pandemic. It would have been all the more complicated and perhaps maybe even a little even more awkward for us to have also had to prepare our own meals. Over 140 meals have been brought into the community, thanks to the diligent work of Harry Jacobs, Joe Tejas, and all the volunteers who lined up earlier today to get us our food. So Harry and Joe, the religious committee, and all the volunteers, my true special thanks in enabling us to have a Seder meal tonight without having to cook. You know, no dishes to clean, no cooking to do. This is okay. You know, we can make something positive out of this. And so with that, we're getting ready for our Haggadah reading this evening. And, oh, Cantor, wonderful. Come on in. Let's get ready for our Seder. Chag Sameach, everyone. Happy Passover to you. From myself and our Cantor, Ken Jaffe, we wish you all a very happy Passover. We begin to celebrate our Festival of Freedom this very evening, albeit still in our distance modality. Nonetheless, with the abilities of our internet, we are able to bring the Haggadah reading to you. I am especially grateful to Phil Carey and his technological expertise in enabling us to stream our Haggadah reading to you. And as you will see, hopefully create a more meaningful kind of Passover Seder, even amidst our separation. During this evening's Haggadah reading, there will be reflection slides that will be presented. These slides have some questions on them that might allow for a deeper conversation with you and your guest at your Seder. If you would like to more fully discuss those questions, please hit the pause button on your device, and you can fully explore those questions and discuss them at your leisure, taking as much time as you would like. And then just hit the play button and you will pick the Haggadah reading right where we left off. That way, I hope to create a multi-layered approach to our Haggadah reading. Those who might like to spend a little more time in discussion, as opposed to those who would like to just stick with the text. The choice will be entirely up to you. And so here we are, gathering on this very evening when our ancestors departed Egypt. Our tradition teaches us that each one of us should see ourselves individually as if we left Egypt ourselves, as if we ourselves wandered out with the Israelites in leaving that servitude behind. And so let us step into our virtual time machine and transport ourselves back 3,500 years to the time of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam in the desert. Woohoo!
Whoa!
There we are. Huh. We didn't even have to move. Feeling a little warm, Cantor?
Yeah, Rabbi, it's getting a little sweaty in here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will just have to make sure we move quickly. But here, ladies and gentlemen, is our first slide for thoughts and considerations. Traditionally, wine is intended to signify joy. What makes this Seder joyful for you? What are you filling your wine glass with? Indeed, what is filling you up right now? Freedom. Freedom is the primary theme of Passover. What freedoms are you celebrating on this night? For those who would like to pause, please do so. We continue with the ceremony of Havdalah. This is Saturday night, and we wish to say farewell to Shabbat with all the rituals that Shabbat deserves. Shabbat has been a friend with us. Maybe this particular Shabbat, it's been a little more harried around our homes, and so taking this moment to say goodbye to Shabbat will be an appropriate thing. With our Havdalah set and our Havdalah symbols, we share in the holiday. We share in the ritual of Havdalah. Our braided candles reminds us of how intertwined our lives are, how much we are all sharing in a similar experience, even in our separate individual lives. The wine reminds us of the sweetness of Shabbat, and the spice box reminds us of that extra bit of soul we get. Tradition teaches us that on Shabbat, the Shekhinah, God's presence, descends and is with each one of us. And as it is closer to us and as we are closer to the Shekhinah, things look brighter. The flowers smell fresher. The food tastes a little bit different. That extra spice, that extra soul is with us on Shabbat. And as it departs, we wish to smell that fragrance as it prepares to leave. Cantor, if you will lead us in our blessings.
Thank you, Rabbi. So please join along with us wherever you will find yourself on this wonderful Passover night. Lie, lie, la, 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 lie, lie, la, 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 lie, la, 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 lie, lie, la, la, lie, la, la, lie, ya, la, 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 lie, lie, la, 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 lie, lie, la, 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 lie, lie, la, la, lie, la, la, lie. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen la 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim borei minei v'samim amen la 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 ya la 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh la 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 ya la 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam amabdil ben kodesh lekodesh המבדיל בין קודש לקודש. המבדיל בין קודש לקודש וקודש לקודש, חטאותינו ימחול. זרענו וכספנו ירבה כחול, וככוכבים בלילה. שבוע טוב, 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 שבוע טוב. אליהו הנביא, אליהו התשבי, אליהו, אליהו, אליהו הגלעדי, במהרה בימינו יבוא אלינו, עם משיח בן דוד, עם משיח בן דוד, אליהו הנביא, אליהו התשבי, אליהו, אליהו, אליהו הגלעדי.
Shavua Tov, everyone. Shavua Tov, Cantor, and also Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
All right, let me move Havdalah out of the way. And bring in and get set up for Passover. Having said goodbye to Shabbat with all the fanfare and the honor that Shabbat deserves, we want to take this opportunity and reposition here for our Passover celebration. The rabbis created the Passover Seder as a vehicle to replace the then temple sacrifice. With the destruction of the temple by Rome in the year 70, Judaism faced a truly existential crisis. Either it would cease to exist, or it would radically transform and become something even more. Obviously, it chose to become something even more, and here we are today. And so, as the rabbis created the Seder, what they wanted to try to capture for us was the pageantry, the majesty, the awe, the joy of coming to the temple in Jerusalem, of being part of that holiday and that celebration. And so, as a way of trying to recapture that moment, our rabbis created 15 steps, 15 things, 15 activities that we are going to do during our Seder. This will have the opportunity to bring us into connection with what used to happen. So let's take advantage of our virtual time machine and go back in time. Here we are, we have gathered at the temple. Again, most of us would have come from the countryside, so going to the big city of Jerusalem, well, this was a big deal. We would have come with our family. We would have gathered with our family and our friends here at the courtyard. We would have brought our yearling lamb to be sacrificed in the temple. The Kohanim, the high priest, would be all dressed in their finest and engage in this ritual of this Passover, our creation myth. There in the courtyard, as you see, those steps that lead up to the center portion of the temple, in which we find the sacred room of the Holy of the Holies. There we could not go, only the high priest can go. You see him there, the Kohen Gadol in his robes in the middle there, probably a little bit behind the Cantor, good thing too. There are 15 things that we are going to engage in. And 15 is an important number for us. Written Yud-Hey, it is part of God. Yah, one of God's names. It is also the beginning of the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name for God, Yud-Hey, Vav-Hey, whose pronunciation we no longer do, but instead we just say Adonai. And finally, of course, Yah is at the end of that great Hebrew word, hallelujah. Say so. The cantor will lead us in a little bit of a chant.
Kadesh urchat, karpas yachat, magid rochza, motzi matzah, maror korech, shulchan orech, Safun barech, Hallel yirtzah.
Excellent. Those 15 steps. So I have before me a Seder plate, but of course in our virtual streaming, it's a little difficult to see. So here I have prepared for us a virtual Passover Seder plate. Here it is, done by the Gudin Silver Company, made with leaves, as you see, connecting all of the various spots for our Passover Seder items. We will, of course, have a chance to take a look more deeply at these items, but right now, let us bring in our Seder plate items. Here are shank bone, we have our flaming maror, we have egg, Haroset, parsley, and of course a whole selection of other items that we will talk about in a bit. Right now, of course, we're missing our matzah. So let's bring in the matzah. There we are. Halachma anya. We will learn more about this later on as part of our Seder. And now with our ritual items here all gathered on our Seder plate, and with everything set and ready, we will continue with our Passover Seder Haggadah. I invite you to get your candles ready. In addition, please also pour yourself a glass of juice or wine so that you can have that ready for we get to. And with that, in Haggadah and the formal part of our Seder meal. Now in the presence of loved ones and friends, before us the emblems of festive rejoicing, we gather for our sacred celebration. With the household of Israel, our elders and our young ones, linking and bonding the past with the future, we heed once again the divine call for service, living our story that is told for all peoples, whose shining conclusion is yet to unfold. We gather to observe Passover as it is written. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought you out of Egypt. You shall observe this throughout the generations as a practice for all times. Indeed, we assemble in fulfillment of the mitzvah, Zachor et hayom hazeh, asher yatsatem mimitzrayim. Remember the day on which you went forth from Egypt, from the house of bondage, and how God freed you with a mighty hand. May the festival lights we now kindle inspire us to use our human powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve the God of freedom. In praising God, we say that all life is sacred, and in kindling these festive lights, we preserve life's sanctity. With every holy light we kindle, the world is brightened to a higher harmony. In praising God, we say that all life is sacred. And so we are brightening the world and bringing about this higher harmony through the very act of kindling these lights. With every holy light we kindle,
Hag Pesach Sameach, I'm Dina Jastrock. We are told that the Israelites departed Egypt at midnight, and that to guide them along the way to freedom, God led them with a pillar of fire by night and a bright pillar of cloud by day. Exodus chapter 13, verses 20 through 22. The festival lights recall these ancient columns which illuminated the uncertain steps of our people out of oppression, through the tribulations of the desert and to the edge of the promised land. Kindling lights renews the faith that no darkness is far too dark for the God of freedom. The night will shine as the day, and the darkness as the light.
Thank you very much, Dina. And so, with our festive lights on this Yom Tov evening, we welcome the holiday of Passover.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Yom Tov.
Amen. Blessed is our eternal God, source of all being, who calls us to holy acts through mitzvot and inspires us to light these festive holiday lights. Centuries ago, our people heard the call of freedom. Tonight, we raise our cups in gratitude to God. May our people's future always be as past. People of Israel, whom the Egyptians keep in slavery, and I have remembered my covenant. God then makes a series of promises to Moses and to the Israelites. God makes indeed 5 whole promises. Ani Adonai v'hotzimti etchem. Therefore say to the people of Israel, I am the eternal God. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. V'hitzalti etchem me'overatam. And I will deliver you from their bondage. V'ga'alti etchem. And I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. V'lakachti etchem li. And I will take you to me for a people, and I will be your God. V'heveti etchem el ha'aretz. And I will bring you into the land concerning which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. Those 5 promises become 5 cups of wine, 4 of which we drink, and 1 we leave for Elijah. Because when the rabbis were creating the Passover Seder, although they were indeed in the land of Israel, Rome was in charge, and Rome was persecuting the Jews mercilessly, and many were suffering. And so the rabbis weren't sure if they had been indeed brought into the land yet. And so they held the 5th cup for Elijah. And so we turn to our first cup, representing the first promise that God made to the Israelites. Ani Adonai v'hotzeti etchem mitachat tzivlot Mitzrayim. Say to the Israelites, I am the eternal God. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. As we lift this first cup of wine, we envision an America, the land of the free, where everyone has a standard of living adequate for health and well-being of him and herself, and of his and her family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services. And I add, given these past couple of weeks, we envision an America in which all will sit, in the words of our prophets, under their vines and under their fig trees, in their massage parlors, in their shopping centers, with none to make them afraid. We continue with the words of our Kiddush and the blessing over our wine, or juice, as is your preference.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar bana mikol am, v'kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav, v'romamanu mikol lashon, v'kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav. Vatiten lanu Adonai Eloheinu be'ahava, modim l'simcha, chagim uzmanim l'sason. Et yom chag hamatzot hazeh, zman cheirutenu, mikra kodesh, zecher etzion Mitzrayim. Kivana bacharata, ve'otanu kiddashtem mikol ha'amim. U'modei kodeshecha, b'simcha v'sason hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim.
Amen. L'chaim Chazan.
L'chaim Rav.
Here are some Kiddush thoughts you might wish to consider. And we continue with the words of our Shechianu, acknowledging that it has been a year since we last gathered in similar circumstances, that we are still living with this pandemic, but we are able to be here. And with the internet, we are able to share in this holiday celebration. We again raise our cups in hopes that next year, the Shana Haba'ah, we will gather together in our sacred temple.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechayanu v'kimanu v'higianu l'zman hazeh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechayanu v'kimanu v'higianu l'zman hazeh.
Indeed. Amen. Thank you very much, Cantor.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And we turn to the step of Karpas. We read in Song of Songs, "For behold, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. The blossoms have appeared in the land, and the time of singing is here. Indeed, spring is in the air." And so we partake of some of the greens. Let us praise God for the renewal of spring. As we welcome the return of spring, let us listen and hear the words of nature. As you dip the beauty of the greens into the water of tears, the salt water, please hear my cry. Can't you see that I am slowly dying? My forests are being clear-cut and diminished. My diverse and wondrous creatures, birds of the sky and beasts of the field, small and large, are threatened with extinction in your lifetimes. My splendid, colorful flora and fauna are diminishing in kind. My tropical places are disappearing before us, and my oceans are warming. Don't you see that my climate is changing, bringing floods and heat and more extreme cycles of cold and warm, all affecting you and all our creation? It does not have to be. You, all of you, can make a difference in simple ways. You, all of you, can help reverse this sorrowful trend. May these waters into which we dip the greens become healing waters to soothe and to restore. And as you dip quietly, make this promise. Yes, I can help protect our wondrous natural places. Yes, I can try to use fewer of our precious resources and to replant and to sustain all the more. I can do my part to protect our forests, our oceans, and our waters. I can work to protect the survival of creatures of all kinds. Yes, I will seek new forms of sustainable energy in my home and in my work. I will turn to the sun, to the wind, and to the water. I make this promise to strive to live gently upon this earth of ours for the good of all coming generations.
Haksumea. My name is Harry Jacobs, and I'm a co-vice president for religion at Temple Beth Or. Why carpus? Many scholars speculate that this practice goes back to ancient Roman banquet customs, which began a meal with hors d'oeuvres and a dip. A number of other reasons have been given for the custom. Carpus is a symbol of spring, of the renewal of the earth that takes place in Nisan, the month of Pesach, and thus it is a symbol of the hope for freedom born anew in our hearts. The salt water is usually interpreted as symbolizing the bitter tears shed by the slaves in Mitzrayim. The salt water represents the oceans and the vegetables represent the earth. Together, they symbolize the world and the hope for its unity and harmony. The curse on Adam was, "You shall eat the herbs of the field, and by the sweat of your brow shall you eat bread." Tonight, we eat carpus, the herb of the field, dipped in salt water, representing the sweat of the brow, and matzah, to remember that while we live in an unredeemed world, we yearn for the final redemption and the return to the Garden of Eden.
Thank you very much, Harry. We take our parsley, we dip it, with the Cantor's help. Cantor, right? We got to do a blessing before we eat anything. Got to do a blessing.
I hope so.
With Cantor's help, we'll do the blessing and then we'll dip and eat.
Yes, and now I do the blessing. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri ha'adama.
Amen. Parsley.
It's Passover. You can taste it.
And here are some karpas thoughts that you might want to explore. We continue with our next step of the Seder. So in my matzah bag here, I have 3 matzot. I take the middle matzah and I break it in half, almost half. The larger portion, I will hide in this afikomen bag, and we will conceal this and eat this later, as we did in the ancient days when we would gather and we would partake of the Passover offering itself in the service in Jerusalem. Among people everywhere, the sharing of bread forms a bond of fellowship for the sake of our redemption. We say together the ancient words which join us with our own people and with all who are in need, with the wrongly imprisoned, the beggar in the street, for our redemption is bound up in the deliverance of the bondage of people everywhere. This is the bread of affliction, we read, ha-lachma anya, the poor bread, which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come. This year, inclusion, distancing ourselves from those we would include normally at our Passover table. This year, we celebrate here. Next year, may we celebrate in the land of Israel. And the Cantor has a special treat for us, because in addition to the readings we are doing that we know so well, the Cantor has brought in some additional melodies for us. Cantor, this is going to be a different halach ma'anya, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, we got Hebrew, we got English all the time, and we got a little of Aramaic. Why don't we also have one of the other languages that Jewish people have spoken for centuries, and that is Ladino.
Ladino.
And so this is a melody that comes from the Sephardic Jews of Egypt, and they sung it both in Aramaic, but they also had a Ladino version of this, and it's called Este el Pan. Este el pan de la aflicción que comieron vuestros padres en tierra de Egipto. Todo el que tiene hambre venga y coma. Todo el que tiene de menester venga y pascue. Este año aquí, el año el viñen, el tierra de Israel. Este año aquí, siervos, el año el viñen, en tierra de Israel, hijos foros.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Halach ma'anya, Aramaic, in Ladino. Excellent. Thank you, Cantor. Thank you very much.
Bread of affliction. Let all who are in want. The first phrase deals with bodily needs, the second with spiritual needs. Each is an important component of liberation. It is difficult to achieve liberation until our physical needs are satisfied. Therefore, the material precedes the spiritual, even though one would assume that the spiritual should have precedence. Similarly, first we left Mitzrayim, and then we received the Torah at Sinai. Perhaps, however, the opposite is true. Spiritual liberation must precede physical liberation. For if the Jews had been given the Torah first, they might have left Mitzrayim without the slave mentality, which led to their constant complaining in the desert. That is why the order is reversed when this halakma section looks to the future. First we mention spiritual redemption, the return to Israel. Only then do we mention physical redemption, the liberation of a people. Physical redemption can be enduring only when it's based upon spiritual redemption.
Thank you, Leslie. I would or El Pan. We read and chanted that this year we are all still slaves. Perhaps next year we will be free. The rabbis included a very painful part in the Passover Seder. The taskmasters in the ancient world were easy to identify. They were the Egyptians in charge. They were the Egyptians giving us orders. The taskmasters of today are a little more subtle, and the rabbis challenge us with this reading that we too need to identify the ways in which we are still enslaved to addictions, to bad habits, to antiquated ideas. And so the Seder Meal was envisioned by the rabbis to be an opportunity of self-actualization in many ways. May we spend time tonight searching our hearts, our souls, and our minds for these hidden taskmasters. Our Torah teaches, remember this day on when you went free from Egypt. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and you shall explain to your child on that day, it is because of what Adonai did for me when I went free from Egypt. And here's the crux of the whole Seder meal. We can't have our Seder meal without questions. We have to have questions. That is what engages us. That is what teaches us. That's how we learn. And so, a thought about questions.
Hag Sameach, everyone. My name is Chris Jastrock. Questions and freedom are synonymous. The right to ask and to know form the essential cornerstone of liberty. The 4 questions are not just a matter of encouraging children to question peculiar rights, but they form a unique part of one's initiation into the ways of the tribe. The Jew and his questioning are one, Elie Wiesel has written. If you learn to ask about the strange practices with which the ancient moment of liberation is commemorated, then perhaps you will never be satisfied with arrogant assumptions, nor with the alluring half-truths of demagogues. Questions make us free.
Mikol Halelot, Mikol Halelot,
Shebechol Halelot, Anu Ochim, Matzah, Matzah, Halayla Hazeh, Halayla Hazeh, Kulo Matzah, Halayla Hazeh, Halayla Kulo Matzah.
Shebechol Halelot, Anu Ochim, Yerakot, Yerakot, Halayla Hazeh, Halayla Hazeh, Harot, Halayla Hazeh, Halayla Hazeh,
Shebechol Halelot, Anu Hatfilim, Anihu Ha'echad, Afilu Anechad, Halayla Hazeh, Halayla Hazeh, Amim, Halayla Hazeh, Halayla Sheteh Be'amim.
Shebechol Halelot, Anu Ochlin, Ben Yoshim, Ben Mesubim, Ben Yoshim, Ben Mesubim. Halayla Hazeh, Halayla Hazeh,
Kulanu Mesubim. Halayla Hazeh, Halayla Hazeh, Kulanu Mesubim.
That's right, folks. You heard it here, folks. You heard it here first. Our religious school students, in their own unique way, asking the 4 questions in a variety of different formats. It was supposed to be chaotic because, hey, sometimes questions are chaotic. A quick reminder, why is this night different from all other nights? Why are we eating matzah? Why are we eating, bitter herbs? Why are we dipping twice? And why are we sitting, reclining, and dining in special fanfare? And here are some more thoughts about questions that you might want to consider. In a way, the rabbi a six of wine, 4 of them we drink. There are 4 questions that we ask, and there are 4 children that we talk about. Because the rabbis noticed that only 4 times in the Torah are we instructed to respond to our children. Our children will ask us, our children will say to us, 4 times. And so they create 4 different types of personalities. Of course, we begin with Chacham, Mahu Shoel. We begin with the wise child. What are the precepts, the laws, the observances which our eternal God commanded you? And so in response to this wise child, we explain the observances of the Passover thoroughly, the very last one of which is, after the Passover Seder, we do not turn to other kinds of entertainment. Rasha, Mahu Omer, the rebellious child. The rebellious child says to you and not to us. He rejects essentials of our faith, the unity of God and the community of Israel. Thus we respond sharply. It is because of what God did for me when I went forth from Egypt, for me, that is, and not for you. For had you been there, you would not have known redemption. More about this in a moment. Yes, we have to examine this. When I was growing up at our family Seder, no matter where I sat at the table, no matter which sibling or cousin I sat next to, I always sat next to the wise child. So I always got stuck with reading this rebellious child. And I noticed something, even at an early age. Perhaps I should have recognized then. I might have wanted to become a rabbi even earlier. But I recognized something in the text. This is the wise child text. The wise child says, what are the precepts, laws, and observances which our eternal God commanded you? The wise child says, you. The rebellious child says, what is this observance to you? They both say to you. So what's going on here? Why do we give a most un-Jewish response to this rebellious child? Yes, an un-Jewish response. We basically say to this child that there is no opportunity for teshuvah, there's no opportunity for change, there's no opportunity for growth. That is un-Jewish. I disagree with the rabbi's response to this wicked child, not only because I got stuck reading it for many years, but because the reason that the rebellious child is rebellious is not because he says, you, the rabbis, missed it. It's very subtle. Did you catch it? Look carefully. The wise child asks. The rebellious child says. The verb is wrong. This is what the rabbis should have focused in on. The verb is wrong. You don't state a question. And here is the insight as to why the rebellious child is the rebellious child. The rebellious child's mind is closed. It is already made up. It does not want to hear the answer. It's simply going through the motions. The wise child is wise because the wise child asks a question. The wise child wants to know. The rebellious child does not want to know. It's not the pronoun you that is the issue. It is the verb that is the issue. Closed minds. When the mind is closed, there's no opportunity for change. There's no opportunity for growth. There is no opportunity for self-actualization. This is why the rebellious child is the rebellious child. We continue on with the other children. The simple child says, what is this? And so we respond to this child patiently. With a mighty arm, God freed us from Egypt, from the house of bondage. V'she'eno yodea lishol, and for the child who's yet unable to ask, we begin in the beginning. V'higadata levanecha b'yom hahu. You shall tell your child on that day, saying, this is because of what God did for me when I went free from Egypt. And thus you begin. Here's some thoughts about the 4 children that you might want to consider. And actually, we must add a little PS from the rabbis. Each one of us, these are not 4 separate children. At various times of our day, our weeks, our months, our years, our life, at various times, we are each one of those children. Sometimes we're very wise and know that we do not know and ask the question. Sometimes we are rebellious. Our minds are made up. We really don't. We just ask, what is this? And sometimes we are so confused that we don't even know where to begin. We continue with our next step on our Seder, moving higher on the plane of our Seder experience. We continue with the Magid, the telling of the story. And what's the telling of the story? The telling of the story is Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves in Egypt. Again, Judaism does a wonderful job of personalizing history. This is not some third-party experience. This is not something remote. This is something that happened to me. Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves. And Cantor, I think we have a new melody for this one as well, right?
Well, yes, we have the Hebrew, but we also but then also later on we have a one maybe in a different language coming up. So yes.
And that language is Yiddish.
Yes. So we're getting a few of the languages which we as let's just say a traveling people have spoken through our journeys.
And as you see, if you look carefully in the background, Cantor, turn around. We are slaves.
Ah, yes, there.
The pyramids.
In the land of pyramids.
Right, the pyramids. And so with that, we have a song in Yiddish. A Yiddish for the version of Avadim Hayinu. We would say in Hebrew, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. But in Yiddish, Cantor, you'll have to sing it for us.
Yes. And do we have also the text in front of us to see that, or?
Yes, we have the text right below you. Just look down there.
Oh, I'm very, very sorry. It's so tiny. My eyes are going. Sorry. In dem Land von Pyramiden gewähne König Bes und Schlecht, seinen dort gewähnt die Jiden, seine Diener, seine Knecht, seine dort gewähnt die Jiden, seine Diener, seine Knecht.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Cantor. Cantor has brought a variety of languages into our the Jews of Spain. We have Yiddish, the Jews of Eastern Europe. Excuse me. We celebrate tonight because we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and God freed us with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Had God not placed the yearning for freedom in the hearts of our people, then surely we and our children and our children's children would have remained enslaved to Pharaoh. Even if all of us were scholars, even if all of us were full of understanding, all of us elders, all of us learned in Torah, it would still be It looks like we're having a little bit of trouble with our slides. Oh, here we go. Now we're catching up. An instance told of this of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Joshua, Rabbi Eleazar, the son of Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon, here at their Seder, and here they are at their Seder. I'm sure they looked exactly like that. They were at their Seder in Bnei Brak, discussing the going out from Egypt through the entire Passover night until their students came and said to them, "Our teachers, the time has already come to recite the morning Shema. Let's spend a little time contemplating the Seder of these rabbis."
Hag Sameach. My name is Neil Rosen. A curious detail stands out in the report about the great sages who met for Seder on Bnei Brak. We are informed that they discussed the exodus from Egypt throughout the Pesach night. But that is all that we are told. None of their questions or answers is reported. None of their arguments or conclusions is passed on to us. Why? They were the most important scholars of their generation. Why were their deliberations not recorded for transmission to later generations? Perhaps the omission is deliberate. Had what they said been reported, others might have become enslaved to their answers, even to their questions. The purpose of the Seder night, of asking probing questions, would have been lost. The Seder is not for mindlessly repeating old formulas. It is looking at the Exodus in new ways, for being transformed by what you discover.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neil. We knew physical servitude in Egypt, but before that, our souls were in bondage. From the beginning, our ancestors were idolaters, but afterwards, God drew us near to the service of the eternal God, as it is written, "Of old, your ancestors dwelled beyond the rivers Euphrates, and they served other gods." We have known physical bondage and spiritual servitude. We have also been subject to social degradation. For in the eyes of others, we were a subject people, Arameans. We read in Deuteronomy, "My father was a wandering Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, and there became a great and populous nation. I took your father Abraham from across the river. I led he and Sarah into the land of Canaan, and I increased his descendants. To Abraham and Sarah I gave Isaac, and to Isaac Rebekah I gave Jacob. And when Jacob and his children went down into Egypt, Joseph was already in Egypt. Joseph had emerged with power over the land of Egypt. There was a famine in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. And Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, 'Go to Joseph. Whatever he tells you, you shall do.' And all the world came to Joseph. And after Joseph died, and after all of his brothers died, in all of that generation, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, 'Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us, and gain ascendancy over this country.' And so they set taskmasters over them and oppressed them with forced labor. They built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom, and Ramses. And the Egyptians embittered their lives with all manner of work in the fields. Yet, the more they increased and spread out, so the Egyptians came to despise and to dread the Israelites. And so Pharaoh charged all the people of Egypt, saying, 'Every boy that is born shall be thrown into the Nile, but let every girl live.' Moreover, the king of Egypt spoke to the midwives of the Hebrews, one of whom was Shiphrah, and the other of whom was Puah. 'When you attend the Hebrew women and see them give birth,' he said, 'if it's a boy, kill it. If it's a girl, let her live.' However, the midwives were God-fearing women, so they didn't do as the king of Egypt ordered, but they let the boys live. This is rather curious, because there's two ways of reading this Hebrew midwives, these midwives to the Hebrews, as we shall now hear.
Chag Sameach. My name is Joe Teus, and I will be doing reading number 9, The Midwives. Our daughters ask, when Pharaoh orders the Hebrew midwives, Shifra and Puach, to kill all the newborn Israeli babies, but to let the girls live, the two women fail to follow his orders, claiming that the Hebrew women are just too vigorous. As it is written, before the midwives can come to them, they have given birth. Exodus 1:9. Who are these two brave women who dare to stand up to the God King of Egypt? The rabbis answer that these two women are none other than Yocheved and Miriam, Moses' mother and sister. Although Pharaoh threatens to burn them alive if they continue to disobey him, they nonetheless stand firm and were miraculously saved from punishment. Hagar the Egyptian counters, no, you have it all wrong. Shifra and Puach were not Hebrew midwives, but non-Israeli midwives of the Hebrews. Yet even though they were not Israelis, they still feared God, that is the Hebrews' God, and so refused to follow Pharaoh's orders and kill the Hebrew babies. They, like Pharaoh's own daughter, were willing to give comfort to the oppressed stranger in their midst. How much more do they deserve to be praised?
So, and interesting, the Hebrew is vague. Were these women Egyptian midwives to the Hebrews, or were these Israelite midwives to the Hebrew? Thank you, Joe. And so we cried unto the God of our ancestors, and God heeded our plight, our misery, and our oppression. God heard our moaning, and God remembered God's covenant with Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. And God looked upon the Israelites, and God knew. Our rabbis ask, what is it that God knew at this time? The Israelites had been enslaved for some time. Why is God just now hearing this moaning? And why is God just now remembering this covenant? What happened? Is there a backlog on prayers to God? Why? Why this? Their answer is that it was the sound of the moaning itself that had changed. Whereas in the early days of their servitude, the Israelites complained bitterly about being slaves, but did not find the wherewithal themselves to free themselves. By the time we get to this stage of their enslavement, the moaning had become one of complacency, that this is our lot in life. We are to be slaves to the Egyptians. And that's when God knew that something had to be done. And God said, I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will mete out justice against all the gods of Egypt. I am the eternal one. And God brought us out of Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm, and by awesome power, and by signs and portents, not through a messenger, not through any intermediary or supernatural being, but the Holy One, blessed be God, in solitary glory. The time the Israelites remained in Egypt was 430 years. And at the end of the 430th year, to the very day, all the children of Israel departed from the land of Egypt. Our tradition teaches that when the Egyptians were drowning in the sea, the angels in heaven were about to break forth in songs and jubilations. After all, the Israelites were singing. We were singing Micha Mocha. But God, the Holy One, silenced the angels and said to them, my creatures are perishing, and you are ready to sing? From the Israelites' perspective, they deserve to sing. From the angel's perspective, you see the horrible cost of the stubbornness of this Pharaoh and what it has done to his people, and how he's continuing to die even now in these waters. You angels, you don't get to sing. And so we are taught to diminish our joy in sympathy for those who have suffered. Thus we will spill 10 drops of wine from our cups, one for each of the plagues upon Egypt. And each drop of wine we spill is hope and prayer that people will cast out all of the plagues that threaten everyone, everywhere they are found, beginning in our own hearts. And so first, a thought about these plagues that you might want to consider. Egat. Cantor. I believe we are ready for our plays, and we have a blood. Here we have a chance to see, of course, that famous scene, the river turning to blood and all the water through all of Egypt, turning to blood. Rather a disgusting thing. But of course, with help of Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner, we have a chance to experience the glory of this, glory and gory of this first plague. Tzvardea. Frogs. Frogs everywhere, all over the place. Kinim. Lice. Lice in their hair, lice in their bodies. Arov. Beasts or swarms. The Hebrew is a little vague for us, so either dever, blight, and the death of animals. Shechin, boils and skin afflictions upon the Egyptians. Barad, hail, a hail that turned into fire. Arbe, locusts, locusts that ate up all the grain. Choshech, a darkness so deep they could not see one another. Makat bechorot, the 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn. And it was this plague in which Pharaoh changed his mind. And so with these plagues upon Egypt, our ancestors were freed. We turn to a very popular song, the song Dainu. But again, with our Cantor's help, we have the opportunity to experience this song in a slightly different language. I believe it is Yiddish.
It sure is Yiddish. And I will sing let's sing the verses a little bit slower. So if you want to kind of join us, join along with us, please do so. And so we will start that, but we'll always have the chorus Dayenu. So we'll still get to do the part that everybody is familiar with. And so,
fortunately, in both Yiddish and Hebrew, Dayenu means the same thing.
Yes, correct. It means Dayenu.
And Cantor?
Yes.
Don't get too wet, okay? We're crossing through the sea of reeds here with our Dayenu.
Okay. I didn't bring my umbrella.
Yeah.
And neither my galoshes. Okay.
I don't have my galoshes either.
Wollten mir not von Mitzrayim glücklich ausgelöst geworden, nur der Jan sich nicht gespotten,
Dayenu.
Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Wollten mir dort man gekommen und dem Schabbes nicht bekommen und zum Sinai nicht gekommen. Dayenu, Die, Dayenu, die, Dayenu, die, Dayenu, 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 die, Dayenu, die, Dayenu, die, Dayenu, Dayenu, Dayenu. Wollten wir dort, sollten wir kommen, ob die Teure nicht bekommen, unser Volk von Tore nicht geworden, die,
Excellent, Cantor. That was wonderful. Yiddish. I have, all of these years, I have never heard Dayenu in Yiddish. So this is wonderful.
By the way, I hadn't either until I found this text. I said, "Oi, this would be so wonderful." So I'm gonna see if actually I can get this for my own Seder. So love to hear that. We got a few Yiddish speakers.
Good, very good, very good. Here, folks, then are some Dayenu thoughts you might want to consider. We continue with our Agada. Rabbi Gamliel Haya Omer. Rabbi Gamliel says it is important for us to consider several different aspects about Passover. And as you see, we have moved yet higher on our plane of our Seder. We have gathered now at this point at the foothills of the Holy Holy. We are at the Kotel in Jerusalem. And it's important for us to consider a number of these aspects of the Passover Seder. It's important for us to delve deeply into these kinds of things. And so to I seem to have, there we go. Here we are. We are back. There's our Passover Seder plate once again. Let's take a look specifically at some of the key items of our Passover Seder plate.
Shank bone of the lamb. What does the shank bone of the lamb represent? Well, of course, it represents the sacrifice that was brought by our ancestors to the temple. It also goes back to the very first Seder we had while we were enslaved still in Egypt. While the 10th plague was taking effect, the Israelites had to smear the blood of the ram on the doorpost of their house. They, that very night, in their homes, ate the paschal sacrifice, the lamb that they had sacrificed, and thus this bone. What is the meaning of this matzah? Well, we know, of course, that we did not have time to prepare our food. We have to remember that bread in the ancient world was like sourdough, and it didn't have time to rise. So we had to bake quickly and leave. Maror, the meaning of maror for our rabbis. If slavery has a taste, it is something to make us gag. It is extremely, extremely bitter, just as the lives of our ancestors were made embittered by the Egyptians. And so that the egg, the roasted egg, represents the additional sacrifice that was brought during the holiday, so that you had to do both the lamb and an additional sacrifice. And of course, that leads us to one of the key items, the Haroset. The Haroset represents the mortar that we had to turn into, to make the bricks with in order to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses for Pharaoh. And so this Haroset, this apple and nut mixture, or the Sephardic version, this represents that. And then a number of special items on our Seder plate, which include an orange, so that we might remember to always include the voice of women in not only our Seder, but in Judaism as well. And then there is the tomato. The tomato is a new one. We want to welcome and acknowledge the members of the LGBTQA community. They are represented on our Seder. Rice, beans, and legumes are on our Seder plate. The prohibition of these items was instituted by the Ashkenazic rabbis, who did not want the Sephardic and Ashkenazic communities to get together. And so it is the Ashkenazic communities that included this ban, and we have it on our Seder plate to remember that we should break down all artificial barriers between us. And finally, we come to the latest item, a pine cone. Yes, this is a new one I learned about. A congregation back east uses a pine cone on the Seder plate because you get to the pine nuts only when the pine cone opens up. And it sort of reminds us of ourselves, that the sweet part of us often lies hidden, buried underneath due to the challenges that we have faced, that we need to remind ourselves to be open like the pine cone and to be able to show that soft and tender part of us. Here are some Seder thoughts that you might want to consider. We continue our Haggadah as we prepare for the second cup, moving us further along our steps of our Seder. We recall the second promise that God makes to the Israelites, V'hitzalti etchem, I will deliver you from their bondage. As we lift this second cup of wine, we envision a modern day Israel that fosters development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. We envision an Israel that is based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. An Israel that will, according to its document of the establishment of the State of Israel, will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all of its inhabitants. We raise wine as we picture the second cup of wine. Cantor.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
L'chaim. Amen. And now we come to 4 steps. 4 steps in our Seder, bringing us 4 steps higher. These 4 steps, since we just did a Kiddush, we're about to eat something. In many communities, this would be another opportunity to wash hands. We do a blessing over the motzi, our bread. We do a blessing over the matzah, because that is our bread. And we do a blessing over the bitter herbs. Yes, we praise God for the opportunity to eat bitter herbs. Let us have the opportunity to do our motzi with the blessing over our bread. First, we're going to do the blessing over the bread. Don't eat it yet, because we have to do the blessing over the matzah, and then we will eat that. Cantor, if you would, please.
Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen. And now the blessing over the matzah.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah.
Amen. We take a bite of the matzah. And on your Seder plates, or somewhere nearby you, hopefully, you have a little bit of maror, a little bit of horseradish. I've got more than a little bit, I've got a lot. You're going to want to dip your matzah into, scoop up a little bit of the horseradish. Ooh. Once again, I said a little bit, but this is a big bit. And with that, we do the blessing over the maror as we prepare to eat the taste of slavery.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat maror.
Amen. B'tei avon. Oh, it sat out and came up to room temperature. Yeah. Woo. And now, for first in recorded history, the first sandwich in recorded history is not from the Earl of Sandwich, but rather from our very own Rabbi Hillel. This was the practice of Hillel from the time when the temple stood. He would combine the matzah and the maror together and would eat them with a little bit of haroset as a way of fulfilling the mitzvah that we should eat the matzah, the unleavened bread, and the bitter herb together. Throw on a little bit of the haroset, so that way, goodness, that way we have the opportunity to fulfill not only Hillel's sandwich, but to bring together the three components of our experience in Egypt. We have the mortar that we were forced to make. We have the bitterness of slavery combined with the bread of freedom. Although we call it the bread of affliction, this is the bread we ate on our journey to our freedom. And so we say again, B'te'avon.
B'te'avon.
Woo! The bad thing about setting out the horseradish at the beginning, instead of taking it right out of the refrigerator right when you need it, is that it is warmed up to room temperature.
Mine's hitting me later. I got thick chunks.
You got thick chunks.
Yeah.
Oh, good for you. Mine is all puree. And so, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, it is to Max. You can stop the video here because there's a second video that will bring you to the conclusion of the Haggadah readings. And in the meantime, here are some thoughts about the Seder meal that you might want to consider. Thank you.